So Marta and I are going to provide the provocation for this, and kind of basically cobbled this together through some old PowerPoint presentation that I had. But one of the nice things about it is it gets us back to ecology. And so I want to go deep ecology on your asses, and talk about some biological stuff and some environmental stuff. And maybe then, as a result of the discussion, we can bring that back to how ecological, what is the other word, Marta? Eco-living. How eco-living makes sense in the real world, as opposed to the human world. I don't know whether we need to actually make that distinction. So this is about markers of provenance for shellfish, and the nice thing about that is that it had a link back to the last discussion, which was kind of food focused. And markers of provenance, for those of you who are not aware of what a marker of provenance is it's a telltale sign, hopefully an indelible one, from which you can tell where something is from. And, you know, with a little bit of thought, you can see where that's important for food production and possibly the shellfish industry. I should give some credit to Sophie Carr, my colleague on this one. She provides the statistics and I provide the biology. God bless her. Okay, now I can just work out how to go to the next slide. Would be good. Okay, so what we're trying to do, the basic thesis of this is that we're trying to find out where that shellfish comes from. Somebody turns up with a bag of shellfish and they say, this is from XYZ. Yep, site of special scientific interest, lovely water, they grow and they taste excellent. There's no problem with eating these. And you go, oh, is that right? Okay, but you've just arrived at my door. How can I tell where it came from? And so you have to track it back to the environment, and there's a little bit of basic biogeochemistry for you. These maps provided by the British Geological Survey, who have mapped at really high resolution the distribution of different trace elements on the landforms. And now these trace elements will eventually weather out of the rock, and then the wind will pick them up, or they'll get dissolved into water and that'll be transported into the local marine environment, and then they're available for uptake by the critters that live in them. Some of those will be your shellfish food source. So you can imagine that as they flow down those waterways, and all sorts of stuff goes on, we won't go into that, and how things change when you meet salt water and all of that sort of stuff. But it is possible to track them through the environment and into the offshore environment. Now once that happens, once they're there and they're taken up into the digestive system of a shellfish, all sorts of things start to happen, but the food gets broken down, there's various gradients within the body, there's uptake potential. But what happens is that a lot of these elements get included into the hard parts of the shell in this case, or it could be a bone, or it could be an earstone, an otolith, which occur in fish. So you can do this with other critters, but the nice thing about shellfish is they don't move very far, so you kind of can ground truth it for yourself at the point of study. And so what happens is that these ions get substituted for calcium in the calcium carbonate matrix and lays down a permanent record, which you can then either grind up and dissolve and run through a mass spec or a mass spectrometer to analyse what the relative composition of the shells are, or you can laser ablate it, or whatever you like. Get it into a mass spec is the key thing. So then you get different ratios of these elements, and the tendency is to sort of, if you like, normalise back to calcium, because there's about 1,000 times more calcium than anything else in the shell. And so you express it as a ratio, element calcium ratio. And you can see that you get little differences between the different elements. And if you look at that across the element section, you can start to discern a fingerprint, and this is kind of where the statistics comes in, is to trying to find what the essential signature is of a particular place from something that has grown in it. Now, connectivity is an essential thing with an ecosystem. It speaks to the connection between different populations which are spatially separated, and there are various pathways which allow them to exchange genetic material, particularly in terms of reproduction, and some pathways are just not possible. So you've got your coastal circulation, you've got local processes going on, you've got a certain amount of time that the planktonic larvae can live in the water column, and then at some point they need to settle. There's various clues that an adult population can give out, biochemical clues, to say, here's a really good spot, we're here. And so the connectivity is the thing which actually defines, if you like, in a broader term, what your actual population is. It's not necessarily what you're seeing on a single beach or in a single bay. It may be 50 miles up the coast. It might not be anywhere in between, because there's only a certain amount of time where they're viable in the water column and they sail right past. Right? So it's probably better to tease that out from genetic relationships, but you could do it chemically as well. So there's all sorts of things feeding into connectivity. It's just a way of saying that sometimes there are non-obvious pathways which connect different populations, and they are in fact the same population, and then they contribute further downstairs or downstream. So coming back to the food security point of view, here's your word, Marta. The first one is identity, or to identify. Okay, and I'll leave you if you want to open that out any further. But identity is a key issue here. This is what we're trying to establish. What is the empirical identity? What's the absolute identity of these things, so that we can trace them back to an origin? In terms of an industry, like the shellfish industry, you're interested in your supply chain integrity. And, you know, just as an aside, in recent years, there's been a lot of stuff talk about blockchain, and can we use blockchain technology to track from, you know, arriving on the quayside all the way through to the final user, you know, the restaurant, the person who eats the food. Can we make sure that there's no sort of fraudulent substitution? It's a big thing that they have. The other thing is that this sort of information, particularly things like the connectivity, etc., helps people who manage stocks in the wild to manage them more effectively on an evidence base. And the final one is food security, because if you're managing those things better with real information, proper information, then you've got a much better chance of being able to sustainably manage these on into the future. So that's all I wanted to say, really, just to sort of outline a few points that make sense in the biological ecosystem. I guess the only other things that sort of link back to things that were being said in the last session, two things occurred to me. One is that 100,000 years ago, humans derived everything that sustained them from the natural world. Yeah, so which means that the natural world is built to sustain us. It's just that we want to force the issue at the moment beyond its ability to recuperate. And the other point I'd make is that in terms of an ecosystem, and I think this is true of any ecosystem, whether it's a conceptual one in terms of, you know, future ways of living or organising our towns and cities and communities, the key to an ecosystem is not to create blockages to the energy flow through the ecosystem. When you do that, the ecosystem will change in response to that, and it might not be a change you necessarily want. So it's like you know, in commerce you talk about following the money. I think in ecosystems you've got to follow the energy. And I'm going to hand over to you now, Marta, and avoid the beanbag.